When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I remember holding my teacup, letting the warmth fade into my hands. She said it so calmly, almost like she was reading a line from a script. "It's time for you to go. You don't belong here anymore." For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Shock, hurt, confusion. Maybe all of it at once. I nodded slowly, because there were no words that could fix the crack that had already appeared in my family. I looked around the living room. The furniture, the photographs on the walls, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Everything was familiar, and yet everything felt strange. This was the home I had helped build, the place where I had celebrated birthdays, tucked my grandchildren into bed, and shared countless dinners. And now, in a few calm words, it no longer felt like mine. I glanced at my son. He was standing a few steps away, silent. I could see the conflict in his eyes. The part of him that loved me, the part that wanted to obey, and the part that was tired of years of tension that had been quietly growing between us. I took a slow, steady breath. I told myself to stay calm. I could face this with dignity. But inside, my heart ached. A quiet ache that settled deep in my chest, heavier than anything I had felt before, would change everything. My home, my family, even the way I looked at myself. Nothing would ever feel the same again. I want to tell you about my family, so you can understand how we reached this moment. My husband had passed away years ago, suddenly, leaving me to navigate life on my own. He had been gentle and kind, and I often thought about how much he would have hated seeing his children fight over small things, over pride, over misunderstandings that grew quietly until they became walls between us. I had 2 children, my son, Daniel, and my daughter, Emily. Daniel was my eldest. I had watched him grow from a shy little boy into a thoughtful, reserved man. He had always been close to me, even in his teenage years. Though I could tell he wanted his own space, Emily was different. She was fiery, independent, always speaking her mind. She lived far away now, married with children of her own. And though we called and visited, the distance sometimes made me feel a little lonely. When Daniel met his wife, Lisa, I tried to be welcoming. I truly did. Lisa was smart, charming, and ambitious. But over time, I began to notice the subtle differences in how we approached life. She had her ways. I had mine. I liked the old traditions. Family dinners, long chats over tea, birthdays celebrated with little surprises. She liked order, schedules, efficiency. Nothing too emotional. Nothing too slow. I tried to adapt. I tried to meet her halfway. But it wasn't always easy. There were small moments, tiny sparks of tension, that I ignored at first. A raised eyebrow here, a sigh there, a comment about my cooking, my clothes, my way of speaking to Daniel. I convinced myself it was nothing, that families always have small disagreements. But these small moments began to grow. I remember one afternoon, Emily had called me on the phone. She sounded worried. "Mom, are you sure everything is okay with Lisa? Daniel sounds different these days." I smiled softly. "Everything is fine, sweetie. People just have small misunderstandings sometimes. It's normal, parentheses." But I wasn't sure it was normal anymore. One Sunday evening, I arrived at Daniel and Lisa's home for dinner. I was excited to see him, to spend time with my grandchildren, to feel that warmth of family that I had always cherished. "It smells like you've been cooking too. What's for dinner?" She barely looked at me. "Just some pasta. Don't worry about it." I felt a flicker of hurt but said nothing. I put the lasagna on the counter, trying to hide my disappointment. Daniel hugged me tightly, whispering, "Mom, it's going to be okay. Just relax." The evening was quiet. The children played, laughter spilling out from the living room. But between Lisa and me, there was a wall. Every comment I made, every small gesture I offered, seemed to irritate her. I tried to ignore it, thinking perhaps she was tired or stressed. But deep down, I felt the shift. Something had changed, and I couldn't name it. Later that week, I discovered a letter tucked into a drawer in Daniel's study. I hadn't meant to read it, but my eyes caught a glimpse of words that made my stomach drop. It was from Lisa. She had written about me, about how she felt that I didn't belong in the home, that I was interfering, that my presence caused tension. I folded the paper carefully and put it back. My hands shook. I felt a storm of emotions: hurt, betrayal, sadness. I didn't know how to confront Daniel without breaking something. And I didn't know how to confront Lisa without causing a fight. And then came that evening. The words. The moment I will never forget. It's time for you to go. You don't belong here anymore. I could have cried. I could have yelled. But instead, I smiled, because I knew that showing anger wouldn't help anyone. I wanted to keep my dignity, even if it meant standing silently while the home I loved began to feel like a place where I no longer had a place. I stayed for a while, watching Daniel, watching the children. I felt their love for me, but I also felt the growing distance. I realized that families sometimes break, not in an instant, but slowly, quietly, until one small confession, one hidden truth, brings it all to the surface. That night, I sat in my car before driving home. The rain was soft, tapping on the windshield, creating a rhythm that matched my thoughts. I thought about all the years I had spent with my family, all the love, all the care, and I wondered, how did one sentence, one confession, change everything so quickly? I knew then that my journey was only beginning. I had to understand the cracks, the hidden tensions, and perhaps find a way to mend them, or at least to find peace with them. The home that once felt safe and warm now seemed fragile, and in that fragility, I realized that love is never simple. Love can be complicated, messy, and sometimes painfully quiet. But even in that quiet, there is hope. There is the possibility that even after the hardest words are spoken, hearts can find their way back. After that evening, things didn't improve. They didn't get worse all at once, but the subtle shifts in the air made every visit heavy. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that Lisa and I could find common ground. But the more I stayed, the more I felt the walls growing between us. I remember one afternoon when Daniel called me to help with the children. They had a school project, and he said, "Mom, could you come over for a little while? I need your help with the kids." I was happy. I thought it was a chance to reconnect, to be useful, to feel like part of the family again. I packed my bag with supplies and drove over, humming softly to myself. When I arrived, Lisa greeted me at the door with a polite smile. "Hi," she said. There was no warmth in it. "Hello, Lisa. How are you?" I asked, carefully choosing my words. "I'm fine," she replied shortly, stepping aside to let me in. I could feel the tension immediately. Every glance felt measured, every word calculated. I reminded myself to stay calm. I was here for the children, not to fight. We went into the living room, and I spread out the art supplies on the coffee table. The kids, Anna and Sam, were excited to see me. "Grandma!" they shouted in unison, running into my arms. For a moment, I forgot about the tension, the letter, the words from a few nights ago. For a moment, it was just me and them, laughter filling the room. But then Lisa's voice cut through softly. "Mom, please don't let them make a mess on the carpet." I froze. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a reminder. I wasn't welcome here. I nodded, trying to smile. "Of course, Lisa. I'll be careful." The afternoon continued, quietly. I helped the children with their project, trying to engage them with stories, gentle guidance, and encouragement. But Lisa hovered nearby, watching every move I made. I could feel her judgment in every glance, every sigh. At one point, Anna spilled a little glue on the table. I reached for a cloth to clean it. Lisa immediately stepped in. "I can do that. Let me handle it." I didn't argue. I smiled politely and let her. But inside, a small hurt was growing. I realized that I was no longer trusted to care for the children in my own way. My role once natural and easy, had been replaced by scrutiny. Later, Daniel came into the room. He looked tired, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He sat down beside me quietly. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered. "For what?" I asked softly. "For everything," he said. He didn't elaborate, but I understood. He was torn between his wife and his mother, between the family he had built and the family he had grown up in. I reached out and took his hand. "Daniel, it's okay. We'll figure it out." But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. Could we really figure it out? Or was this just the beginning of a slow drift that we couldn't stop? In the weeks that followed, I began to notice more signs of tension. Small disagreements between Lisa and me, which I tried to brush off, but they added up. Sometimes it was about the children. Sometimes it was about me. A comment here about my clothing. A subtle critique there about my way of speaking to Daniel. I tried to stay patient, to keep my voice calm, to never raise my tone. But each small encounter left a tiny mark on my heart. I began to feel like an outsider in a place that had once been my home. One evening, Daniel invited me to help with dinner again. I brought along a simple dessert I had baked. I hoped it would remind him of happy times, of the warmth we had shared. As soon as I entered the kitchen, Lisa's expression tightened. "Mom, maybe you should just wait in the living room," she said. I nodded, though it hurt. I set the dessert on the counter and tried to smile. Daniel caught my eye and gave a small, apologetic shrug. I sat in the living room, listening to the sounds of chopping and sizzling. I could hear Lisa directing Daniel in the kitchen. I could hear her telling him the proper way to measure ingredients, the proper way to arrange plates. Every word was a reminder that my presence was not needed, not trusted, not appreciated. Later that evening, Daniel and I spoke quietly in the hallway. "Mom, I don't know how to make her happy," he said. "Daniel, you don't have to. You just have to be yourself," I replied softly. "I know, but I feel stuck," he admitted. "I don't want to hurt you, but I also don't want to fight with Lisa." I nodded, understanding more than he knew. Sometimes love requires patience. Sometimes love requires stepping back, even when it hurts. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I continued visiting, continuing to help where I could, trying to be invisible yet present. But the distance between Lisa and me was growing, and with it, a quiet sadness settled in my heart. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Daniel, about the children, about the family we had all once shared. I could feel the strain in every conversation, in every shared meal, in every silence. I remember one particular afternoon. I had come over to help the kids with homework. Lisa was unusually curt. "Mom, don't distract them. Just sit quietly and let them work," she said. I obeyed, but my heart ached. I wanted to reach out, to guide, to nurture, but I was being silenced. It felt like a slow erosion of the role I had cherished my whole life. After the children went to bed, I sat in the living room alone. Daniel came in, looking exhausted. I don't know what to do," he said quietly. "Just take it one day at a time," I told him softly. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was enough. Could patience really heal this? Could love really bridge a gap that seemed to widen every day? And then, the subtle cracks began to show in other ways. I overheard a whispered conversation between Lisa and a friend on the phone. Words like interference and too much floated through the thin walls. My heart sank. I realized that this wasn't just about small disagreements anymore. There was a narrative being built about me, a story where I didn't belong, where my presence was a problem. I felt powerless. I felt invisible. I felt like I was losing not just my place in their home, but my place in their hearts. That night, I wrote in my journal, trying to make sense of it all. "I love them. I only want to help. Why does love feel like this sometimes? Why does care become unwelcome?" I knew one thing clearly. The rising tension was not going to resolve itself. Something had to happen. Something had to break or change. And deep down, I feared that the breaking point was closer than I wanted to admit. It happened on a quiet Saturday afternoon. I had come over, as I often did, to spend time with the children. Daniel was busy with work calls in his study, and Lisa had gone out to run errands. I thought perhaps this would be a calm, peaceful day. Just me, Anna, and Sam. We were sitting at the kitchen table, coloring, laughing quietly at our own little jokes. I had learned to cherish these moments, the small fragments of happiness that made all the tension bearable. Then I heard it, a soft knock on the back door. I got up and opened it to find a delivery envelope lying on the porch. I picked it up, noting the handwriting, Daniel's, precise and familiar. Curious, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My eyes scanned it, and my heart stopped. It was a letter. From Daniel. But it wasn't meant for me. At least, I don't think it was. It was a confession. A truth I had been blind to. A truth that explained the tension, the cold glances, the subtle distance that had been building for months. Daniel had written about a secret he had kept from everyone. A mistake he had made years ago. A choice that had affected the family in ways I could not yet understand. He had never told me because he was afraid. Afraid of my disappointment. Afraid of Lisa's reaction. Afraid of losing control of the life he had carefully built. I held the paper in my hands, trembling. I felt like the floor had shifted beneath me. This was the confession that had caused the ripples, the one sentence that had changed everything. I don't remember how long I stood there. Minutes, perhaps hours. The children were still at the table, coloring and talking, oblivious to the storm growing inside me. I finally took a deep breath and sat down, trying to process it. When Lisa returned, she immediately noticed the tension in my face. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously. I nodded slowly, folding the letter and putting it back in my bag. "Yes, just thinking," I said softly. But I wasn't just thinking. I was unraveling. The truth Daniel had hidden, the weight he had carried alone, now rested with me. And in that moment, I realized something else. This was the reason Lisa had been distant. The reason the warmth in the home had faded. It wasn't just about me. It was about a past mistake, a secret, a confession that had been buried and left to grow, until it reshaped everything. That evening, I decided I had to confront Daniel. I couldn't keep the letter to myself. I had to understand, to see if we could face this together, before it tore the family apart. I found him in the study, papers scattered across the desk, his face tired and drawn. "Daniel, I saw the letter," I said gently. His head shot up, eyes wide. "Mom, I held up my hand. "I need to know. I need to understand. Please, just tell me." He took a deep breath, ran his hands through his hair, and began. His voice was quiet, hesitant, but steady. He confessed everything. Years of mistakes, choices he had made, regrets he had carried alone. I listened, feeling a mixture of sadness, empathy, and shock. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," he said finally, tears glistening in his eyes. "I thought I could fix it later, that it wouldn't matter. But it does. And now I see how much damage it's caused." I reached out and took his hand. "Daniel, you're human. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we face them, and we try to heal." He looked at me, hope flickering in his eyes. But I could also see the fear. The fear of losing Lisa, of losing me, of losing the family he had worked so hard to protect. That night, we spoke for hours. The children were asleep, and Lisa had gone to bed early. We talked quietly, slowly, carefully. Daniel explained every detail, every choice, every regret. I listened, offering words of comfort, of understanding. And then came the moment I realized something else. Lisa's coldness, her strictness, her quiet judgment, they weren't just about me. They were about the secret, the confession Daniel had kept hidden for so long. She had felt the tension, the deceit, the unspoken truth. And in her own way, she had been protecting herself, her family, and even Daniel. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief, because I finally understood the root of the conflict. Sadness, because the truth had hurt all of us, and we had all carried it alone for far too long. In the following days, I began to notice small changes. Daniel seemed lighter, unburdened, now that the secret was out. Lisa, while still cautious, began to soften in her interactions with me. The children, oblivious to the adult complexities, continued to bring joy and laughter into the home. But the turning point had been reached. The moment of revelation, of truth, had shifted everything. Nothing could ever go back to exactly the way it was, but perhaps that was okay. Perhaps some truths, though painful, are necessary for growth, understanding, and healing. I reflected on the weight of secrets, the quiet damage they can do, and the power of confession. Sometimes, one truth, spoken gently, carefully, can change everything. Sometimes it can break a home. Sometimes it can also rebuild it if approached with love and patience. I remembered the moment I had smiled when Lisa told me to leave. That calm, quiet acceptance had been necessary for me to survive the tension, to stay present, and to be ready for the truth when it came. And now, as the family slowly began to breathe together again, I realized that my patience, my quiet strength, had been a small part of holding the family together until the turning point arrived. That week, we sat together at the kitchen table. Daniel told Lisa everything. The confession laid bare between them. And though it was awkward, uncomfortable, even painful, it was honest. And honesty, I realized, was the first step toward healing. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of hope. The home, which had felt heavy and distant, began to feel familiar again. Not exactly the same as before, but real, authentic, and ready to be rebuilt on a foundation stronger than before. One of truth, understanding, and careful forgiveness. After the confession, the house felt different. Not louder, not brighter, not immediately happier, but different. There was a weight lifted, yes, but there was also a quiet awkwardness. Everything had been revealed, and now the real work began. Rebuilding trust, finding our places again, and learning to love one another honestly, without secrets. The first few days were tentative. Lisa was cautious, watching me with measured eyes. I could see her struggle between suspicion and curiosity, between old frustrations and the hope of moving forward. I didn't take it personally. I understood now that she had carried her own fear for months, if not years. I tried small gestures. A warm greeting in the morning, offering to help with breakfast without hovering, listening without giving advice unless asked. Slowly, carefully, I tried to show that I respected her space while still being present for my son and grandchildren. Daniel seemed lighter, more relaxed. I think releasing the secret had freed him in ways none of us fully understood at first. He laughed more easily. He spoke more openly, and he was patient when tensions arose. His quiet strength during this time reminded me why I had always admired him, even as a child. One afternoon, I stayed late to help the children with a craft project. Anna was painting. Sam was cutting out shapes. I watched them carefully, giving gentle guidance, and I noticed Lisa watching from the doorway. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and she gave the smallest of nods. A tiny acknowledgement, but it meant the world to me. I smiled softly, feeling a spark of connection where there had been distance. That evening, Daniel and I sat together on the porch after the children went to bed. The sky was a soft pink, the air calm. He put his arm around my shoulder and sighed. "Mom, thank you for staying calm through all of this." He said quietly. I looked at him and smiled. "Daniel, I had to. I love you and I love this family. Sometimes love isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes love is quiet, patient, and waiting for the right moment." He nodded, his hand gripping mine. "I don't know how to fix everything, but I want to try. I really do." "That's all anyone can do," I said softly. The following weeks were a mix of small victories and quiet struggles. There were moments when old habits crept back in, snapped comments, tense silences. But we handled them differently. We talked, we listened, and we reminded each other of what mattered most: family. One afternoon, Lisa approached me while I was preparing tea for the children. "Mom, I wanted to say something," she began, her voice tentative. I looked up from the teacups and smiled gently. "Yes?" She took a deep breath. "I know things have been hard between us. I've realized I misjudged you. You only ever wanted to help, to care for your family. I'm sorry for being harsh." I felt warmth spread through me. Not relief, not triumph, just quiet understanding. "Thank you, Lisa. That means a lot. I know this hasn't been easy for you either." She nodded, a small smile forming. "I want us to work together. For Daniel, for the kids, for all of us." "We will," I said softly, feeling a weight lift from my chest. That night, Daniel and I sat together in the living room. The children were asleep and the house was quiet. We spoke about everything, about mistakes, regrets, and the lessons we had learned. I realized that the confession, though painful, had given us clarity. It had allowed us to rebuild, not erase, the past. I began noticing subtle changes in the household. The laughter of the children returned more naturally. Dinner conversations flowed with less tension. Lisa's guidance became gentle instead of sharp. Daniel's patience seemed endless, and for the first time in months, I felt the warmth of family filling the home again. One evening, as we were all gathered around the table for dinner, I looked at my son, my daughter-in-law, and the children. I felt a quiet gratitude. Life had been messy, complicated, and sometimes unfair. But here we were, together. We were choosing each other, choosing love over fear, understanding over judgment. I spoke softly, mostly to myself, but loud enough for Daniel to hear. This is what family looks like. Not perfect, not always easy, but real. And that's enough. Daniel smiled at me. "It's more than enough, Mom." I realized then that forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a process. It's a series of small choices to understand, to trust, to be patient, and to love despite mistakes. And I realized that love can survive even when the truth shakes everything apart, if we face it together. There were still moments of tension, small disagreements, and occasional awkwardness, but we approached them differently now. We communicated, we listened, we acknowledged feelings instead of burying them. Slowly, the walls that had built up between us were replaced by bridges. One rainy afternoon, I sat with Lisa and the children near the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. Anna leaned against me, whispering, "Grandma, I love our family." I held her close and whispered back, "I love it too, sweetheart. Always." Lisa watched quietly, a soft expression on her face. For the first time, I saw acceptance and understanding, not distance. I knew then that while the past could not be erased, the future could still be shaped with care, honesty, and love. That evening, Daniel and I spoke again, reflecting on the journey we had taken. "Mom, I don't think I could have faced all of this without you," he said. "You wouldn't have had to," I replied, "but I'm glad I was here. Because families, no matter how broken, deserve a chance to heal." And slowly, they did. We laughed more, hugged more, and shared small moments that felt monumental. The home that had once felt heavy now felt warm again. Not because everything was perfect, but because honesty, understanding, and patience had returned. The confession, the tension, the hurt, they had all been necessary. They had been painful, yes, but they had cleared the path for something stronger: trust, love, and real connection. I learned that families aren't defined by perfection, but by resilience. By the willingness to face truth, even when it's hard. By the courage to forgive, even when it's difficult. And by the quiet choice to love, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. That week, we all gathered in the living room after dinner. The children played, Daniel smiled, Lisa offered me tea, And I realized something simple but profound. We were home again. Not the same as before, but real and filled with love that had been tested and survived. And for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. The days after the confession passed quietly. Life settled into a rhythm that felt natural, even if fragile at first. There were no grand celebrations, no sudden declarations of peace. Just small moments, moments that reminded us why we were family, and why we chose to stay connected despite the mistakes, the misunderstandings, and the pain. One morning, I woke early and made tea for Daniel and the children. The house was still, bathed in soft sunlight. I heard little footsteps behind me, and Anna peeked into the kitchen. "Grandma," she whispered, "can I help?" I smiled, and together, we arranged the cups and plates, our laughter soft and easy. Sam joined us soon after, and I realized something simple but profound. This was what family felt like. Not perfection, not constant happiness, but small, shared moments of care and presence. Lisa entered the kitchen quietly. She looked at the three of us and smiled. A real smile, warm and soft. "You know," she said, "I think we're finally getting it. All of us. Finally but surely. I think it." I thought back to the day she had told me to leave, the words that had pierced me, the tension that had filled the house. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything I had known. But looking around now, I realized it had been the beginning. The moment of confrontation, of truth, had allowed us to rebuild in ways that silence and avoidance never could. That evening, Daniel and I sat on the porch again, the sky painted with the soft hues of sunset. We didn't speak much at first. Words weren't necessary. There was understanding in our silence. I reached out and held his hand. "I'm proud of you," I said softly. He squeezed my hand gently. "Thanks, Mom. I'm proud of us too. For trying, for staying together." I realized then that love and family are not always easy. They are messy, complicated, and sometimes painful, but they are also resilient. They survive truth, mistakes, forgiveness, and patience. And they endure because of quiet choices, small acts of care, and the courage to face what hurts, instead of hiding from it. That night, as I tucked the children into bed, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not relief, not triumph, just peace. Peace in knowing that we had faced our struggles honestly, that we had listened, and that we were moving forward together. Later, I sat alone in the living room for a while, the soft hum of the house around me. I reflected on what I had learned through this journey. That honesty can break a home, or it can save it. That patience and quiet love often matter more than words or grand gestures. That forgiveness isn't a single act, but a series of choices made day after day. I also realized that families, like people, are never perfect, and maybe they shouldn't be. It is in the imperfections, the mistakes, the misunderstandings, the confessions, that we discover who we really are, who we truly love, and what truly matters. The rain began softly outside, tapping against the windows. I watched the droplets race each other down the glass, and thought about the journey we had taken. How fragile, yet strong we could be. How easily trust can be shaken, but how patiently it can also be rebuilt. As I prepared for bed that night, I whispered a quiet promise to myself, to continue loving without judgment, to continue listening without anger, and to continue being present, no matter what challenges may come. Because that is what family is, not just a place, or a house, or even blood. It is care, patience, understanding, and a willingness to face the truth, even when it is hard. And in the quiet warmth of my home, surrounded by those I loved, I finally felt it, a gentle, steady hope. That, no matter the storms, no matter the confessions, no matter the misunderstandings, love would remain. And that, I realized, was enough.